Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Yolanda Joy Calvo Benzis, who obtained a BA in English Language and Literature at the University of Santiago de Compostela in 2008. And later on, she had a master's in English Linguistics in 2010 at the same university. She defended her PhD dissertation under the supervision of Dr. Ignacio Palacios Martinez in January last year, obtaining an international mention. Her dissertation was devoted to the role that pronunciation has in EFL classes and teaching materials in Spain. In the year 2013, Yolanda carried out a 3-month research stay at the University of Reading at the Department of English Language and Applied Linguistics. She's interested in language teaching, particularly in the teaching of pronunciation and speaking, second language acquisition, new varieties of English for teaching EFL and ESP, and the use of games, songs, and new technologies in language lessons. She was involved in the organization of several conferences, such as the International Conference of Spoken English and the 4th International Postgraduate Conference on Language and Cognition. Yolanda has published a number of articles and book chapters, some in refereed journals, and she has delivered papers in over 20 national and international conferences, such as AESLA, IDEAN, APROLinguas, or TechLink, for example. Right now, she's a researcher in GRALING, Grupo de Investigación en Análisis Lingüístico at the University of the Balearic Islands, and also collaborates with Spertus, spoken English research team at the University of Santiago de Compostela. She's also a member of the ELC Research Network, which ELC stands for English Linguistic Circle. And in September 2016, Yolanda moved to the University of the Balearic Islands, where she has recently obtained an assistant lecturer position to teach English for tourism. So the floor is yours. Welcome.
So thank you very much, Maria Angeles, for this extensive introduction. I didn't realize I've done so many things. Right? So first of all, I would like to begin thanking all the organizing committee of EFL, especially Maria Angeles. She's my, I don't know, she's my angel. She's the one that tried to convince the rest of you to bring me here. And also the general organization of the conference. I've enjoyed all of the talks that I went to. Yesterday the tour and the dinner were just excellent. The plenary speaker of yesterday, everything that I've been to, I've enjoyed very much. Right, so as Maria has said, I basically worked on the teaching of English pronunciation in Spain, and so this is what I'm going to be talking about today. So the title is The Teaching of EFL Pronunciation in Spain from 3 different perspectives, what research can tell us and how it can be applied to the real world. Okay, I'm going to begin by presenting up here because I have a couple of audio files that I want you to listen to, and then I will go down there because I don't like being up here. Right. Okay, so this is the outline of my presentation today. I will devote the first part of telling you why I'm interested in this topic, then refer to the 3 practical studies that I'm going to describe in more detail, then the conclusion, so coming back to the second part of the title, and finally a justification of why I think that we need a remedial program in the teaching of pronunciation in this country. So to begin with, why my interest in pronunciation and not grammar, vocabulary, or the teaching of reading or writing? So to begin with, pronunciation is an important language area. According to Seidel-Hofer, it plays a central role in both our personal and social lives. And according to Jorda, it is essential for intelligibility. Also, it does not only affect listening and speaking skills as is commonly thought, but it affects the whole 4 skills. So according to Underline, he says that pronunciation is in all language activities. It is integral to the planning, processing, receiving, and producing of language, not just acoustic speech. So in other words, of course, when we're speaking and listening, pronunciation is working, but also if we're reading, we may be reading the words in our brains, or we're also pronouncing the words. Moreover, it's very easy to end up with fossilized mistakes that are difficult to overcome if they're not corrected from the beginning. So as Maria Angeles said, I'm currently a university teacher at the University of the Balearic Islands, and even these university students, some of them come pronouncing the preposition since as since. And it's very difficult for me to tell them, no, it's since. And all the time they're since, right? And finally, pronouncing incorrectly. Okay, here we have inverted commas because it's not actually, because I'm going to show you in a minute 2 videos. You're not actually going to see them, you're just going to hear the audio. So it's not actually pronouncing incorrectly, but in a way, so in a non-standard way, so away from the RP and the General American. Okay, so, or understanding a word incorrectly may lead to misunderstandings. Okay, so here we have 2. You may have seen these videos before. So one, a German Coast Guard trainee, and you will see in a minute that he misunderstands a particular verb. And then a voice recognition elevator in Scotland. So we have 2 people from Scotland in a lift, and we will see, well, it's quite a funny audio. I hope you like it.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät, das Überlebensradar.
This is the German Coast Guard. We're thinking. What are you thinking about?
Okay, so I hope you got the idea. They were saying they were sinking, and he was thinking about the verb thinking. Right, and then here are the 2 Scottish men in the lift.
Voice recognition technology in a lift in Scotland. You ever tried voice recognition technology? No. They don't do Scottish accents.
11. Could you please repeat that?
11.
11. 11.
11.
Could you please repeat that? 11.
Whose idea was this? You need to try an American accent.
11. 11.
That sounds Irish, not American.
What, doesn't it?
11.
Where in America is that? Dublin? I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that? Try an English accent, right?
11. 11.
You for the same part of England as Dick Van Dyke.
Listen, your things.
Right, so here you get the basic idea. The video is actually nearly 4 minutes, right? Right, so that's the first reason that I believe that is an important language area. The second reason, it's often regarded as a highly complex part of the English language. So here you have, some references. Some of the reasons that are commonly accounted for this difficulty is the lack of correspondences between English pronunciation and spelling. So, for instance, for the spelling we have 26 orthographical letters for 44 different sounds. And so, for instance, for the spelling AU, it can be pronounced differently, as in astronaut, auntie, sausage, or even not pronounced at all, as in restaurant. Moreover, biological, personal, cultural, social, or psychological factors also play an important role in this learning process, and it is not enough to know how to pronounce words correctly in isolation, but one should also communicate with some degree of fluency and accuracy at the same time. Right, and the third reason is that pronunciation has traditionally been neglected in EFL classes around the world. So here again you have some references, and so it's been referred to as the poor relation of the English language teaching world, the orphan, or even the Cinderella in language lessons. Some reasons for this, some scholars state that it is considered time-consuming, so it takes a lot of time to teach inside the classroom. Teachers lack specific training, do not feel confident, or do not consider themselves as suitable models for not being native speakers of the language, or a lack of suitable materials, guidelines, or language labs in order to be able to teach it properly. Right, so now I've spoken about why I'm interested in pronunciation, so now why the teaching of pronunciation in this country? First, I suppose most of you agree with me that Spanish learners tend to have many problems when it comes to English pronunciation. We could say that on some occasions it's their Achilles heel. Some of the main problems that they have is the fact that they pronounce schwa as a full vowel guided by the spelling of the word. Some problems with short and long vowels, with the inverted U, with the h or the r sounds, consonant clusters, so initial S, like S stop, or finally D, so the participles they have problems with. There are two main reasons for these difficulties. First, the lack of similarities between the phonological systems of both languages, and also the transparent orthographical system in in Spanish versus the highly irregular one that we just saw now with the AU spelling in English. And also, although Spanish students have always had problems with pronunciation, this is not just an old topic in the media, but it's still quite modern. So from time to time we see online newspapers with headings about how we speak in English. Here you have some examples. So 9 out of 10 Spaniards still feel awkward when speaking in English. Only 28% of Spanish students speak English well. 63% of Spanish students do not understand English at the end of their obligatory secondary education studies. And then a bit more humoristic headlines. Scientists from the University of Cambridge confirmed that Spanish people cannot learn English. Our accent gives us away. These are our most common errors. And finally, the most common English words that Spaniards have no idea of how to pronounce. Okay, so despite all of these studies, those that I just mentioned, I saw that most of them speak of general problems that Spanish speakers have. So, as I mentioned before, the schwa, the h, the ra, the initial s, so on and so forth. And so what I started thinking was, do students of all the levels have the same problems, or have the advanced ones overcome problems with certain sounds that the elementary students still have? So this was the main topic of my MA dissertation, and it corresponds to the first study that I'm going to talk about today. So I defended in 2011. A couple of years ago already. Right, so in this study, I had 20 participants from different levels of education. So they were between 14 and 24 at the year, at the moment in which the study was conducted. 5 students were in third year of obligatory secondary education, 5 in first year of bachillerato, and then 10 in the old 5-year English philology degree. So 5 in third year and 5 in their last year of this degree. They were all bilingual speakers of Spanish and Galician, and obviously they were studying English as a foreign language. In the case of the university students, most of them offered to participate as a volunteer, whereas in the case of the high school, they were directly chosen by their EFL teacher. Regarding the research materials, I used 3 different instruments. First, a personal interview in which the subjects had to talk about themselves. I gave them a list of topics, of questions, so to make it easier. So, what's your name, where you're from, what's your favorite animal, so on and so forth. But in the end, I decided not to take this activity into consideration because I considered it more as an icebreaker to calm them down before conducting the other 2 activities. So the 2 activities that I did analyze was first a picture description in which they had to describe 6 pictures which represented, we could say, a bad day in a man's life. And then a reading aloud text, so 150 word text, called Downloading Music, which was extracted from a third-year ESO textbook. Okay, so here you have the pictures they had to describe. And we're just going to listen very briefly to a third-year ESO student trying to describe this situation. Right, so you get the basic idea. And here, this would be the text that they had to read. And on this occasion, you'll be listening to a first-year bachillerato student. Okay, right. So the general results, in total I identified 503 mistakes. As would seem feasible, those in third year of secondary education made more mistakes than those in their last year of philology. So at least we can be optimistic that they are improving. However, sorry. What did I do? Here. They did make some mistakes with consonant, but they were basically vowels. So nearly 80% of the mistakes were with vowels. I have here the top 5 vowels that they made mistakes with. So we have schwa, the north vowel, the palm vowel, the goat diphthong, and finally the fleece vowel. Right, so what main conclusion could I extract from this study? So advanced EFL Spanish students, so the university ones, had improved problems with some sounds, but they continue to have problems with others. So they were about to licenciarse, to yeah, okay, and in experts of English, but they still had problems with some parts of English pronunciation. So I thought this was quite negative because they've been studying English for about 15, 16 years, and to still say things like computer, stop, things like that. So I thought this was negative. So afterwards I decided for my PhD dissertation to try and find possible empirical reasons for this negative situation. And I thought of 2 main reasons. So the first one would be the views of Spanish students and teachers regarding how pronunciation is taught from secondary school onwards. And the second one, the actual role that pronunciation plays inside the teaching materials that are used in this country. So these would be studies 2 and studies 3. Right, so why do I think it's important to take into consideration the views of both teachers and students? Okay, so despite the impositions of any educational system or the government or whatever, these 2 participants are the most important participants in any language classroom. They are the ones that knows what goes on, how they're improving, and so on and so forth. Also, little research had been done on this field at the moment that I did my dissertation. So we did have, we did have a few studies, for instance, Walker and Henderson et al., but they only studied the views of some teachers, or Nowaka that analyzed the views of some university students, whereas, as you will see in a minute, mine is 3 main levels of education. So it was basically a questionnaire-based study in which I designed 2 questionnaires, one for the students and one for the teachers, but most of the questions were the same in order to compare their views afterwards. Regarding the format, most of the questions followed a multiple choice or a Likert scale from 1 to 5, so either never to always or I totally agree to I totally disagree. Regarding the administration of the questionnaires, in the case of the high school students, I personally went to each of the centers where I conducted the study, and in the case of the teachers, most of them had to fill out the questionnaire online. I also conducted a few interviews because some of the results in the questionnaires were not sufficiently clear, so I interviewed some of the students. And in total, the questionnaires I administered were 1,170 students and in Galicia, and 254 teachers working either in Galicia or outside of Spain. Outside of Galicia. Why? Because I saw that, for instance, for the university teachers in the English philology, there were about 15 or 20 teachers. Not all of them filled out the questionnaire, so I needed to go outside. Whereas for the secondary school teachers, there are many, so they did reply. A sufficient number replied. Both groups are divided into 3 main subgroups. The first one would be pre-university, so eso en bachillerato. The second, the university students, so studying a BA in English, either the old one or the new 4-year degree. And the third one, the language center, so the Spanish School of Languages and the Modern Language Center at the University of Santiago. Right, so I'm just going to give you some results because obviously I don't have time to go through every single item. So here we have, I think, a positive result. So as you can see, I hope, for both the students and the teachers, about 80% of them agree or totally agree. So they're on the agree component that learning how to pronounce correctly in English is important. When I asked them whether they think that English pronunciation is difficult, again, the teachers, no problem. About nearly 70% of them agree or totally agree. In the case of the students, we see that 34% of them opted for the neutral option, so we could say the easy option. But if we add up those that agree and totally disagree, totally agree, we see, again, so they're most of them do think that English pronunciation is difficult. Here, these 2 questions were for the teachers. So I asked them whether they think that Spanish learners of English tend to have problems with pronunciation. And again, they agree. And most importantly, they think that these problems need to be dealt with inside the classroom. But they don't think that the Spanish educational system pays enough attention to pronunciation. And regarding whether they believe that enough time is devoted to pronunciation, both the students and the teachers disagree. So obviously they're not getting enough output or input in this language area. Right, some more results. So speaking English with a native accent is important for some of the students, but not for others, so this is quite positive. But in the case of the teachers, this really surprised me because nearly 70% of them believe that teachers should have a native-like pronunciation in the classroom, whereas I'm sure Maria Angelis is going to talk about this afterwards, whereas now you know that intelligibility is a lot more important than sounding native, but 70% of the teachers still think that it's important for them as teachers to sound native, and nearly 40 of them that they should obtain a native-like accent from their students, which is even more surprising. Only 34% of the students admitted feeling shy to speak in English, so this is quite positive, but half of the teachers considered that their students are shy to speak in classroom, so here we have a clear lack of communication between the teachers and the students. Between 65 and 70% of the teachers believe that EFL teachers need a good knowledge of English pronunciation in order to be able to teach it. They personally mentioned that they feel confident in teaching this language area, but they never received any training in how to do so. Most of them. Okay, so, well, nearly half of them. Around 70% of the students mentioned that they think that their level of pronunciation has improved in the last few years, but in the case of the university students, so remember these were BA students studying a major in English, they mentioned that it was not actually thanks to the degree, but as a year abroad as an Erasmus student or some autonomous learning outside of the classroom, so not thanks to the degree. Okay, it seems that according to the teachers, they mentioned that they themselves always speak in English in the classroom, so a very positive result. But in the case of the students, both students and teachers agreed that the students only speak on some occasions in English in the classroom. And this was found at the 3 levels, so also in the university level. Right, outside the classroom, the students mentioned they listen to music a lot in English, also use new technologies, but they very rarely speak. So a conclusion from these 2 results is that both inside and outside the classroom, they are practicing more their perceptive oral skills than their productive ones. Pronunciation tasks, according to the results, are only carried out on some occasions. According to the students, the only productive pronunciation task is listen and repeat, and afterwards we will connect this with the other study on the textbooks. And they said that songs games or computer programs are never used to teach pronunciation in the classroom. Whereas according to the teachers, they say that they use all 4 types of activities on some occasions. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, because I didn't do any class observation. Maybe that could be future research. Okay, so obviously we could conclude that pronunciation is maybe being taught indirectly in some tasks that the students are not aware of it. So maybe in a speaking activity, the teacher is correcting them and they're not aware that they're practicing schwa. Most teachers mentioned they often correct their students' pronunciation mistakes, but according to the students, and that their students do not always appreciate these corrections, so they're like defensive when they're corrected, but according to the students, their teacher always corrects their pronunciation mistakes and they're always open to being corrected. So again, different opinions there. The only production correction method used, mentioned both by the students and the teachers, is listen and repeat. So listen to me and then repeat it in the correct way. And regarding textbooks, their opinions are that they include hardly any pronunciation activities, which do not always help them improve, and that the format of the task, according to them, is very repetitive. And as we will see in a minute, they are totally correct in this. Right, so this brings me to the last study. So why is it important to analyze textbooks in this case? So despite all of the new technologies and all these new materials that we have in language classrooms, the textbooks still remain to be the main material used in the classroom. And also in this case, there was a complete lack of research regarding the role of pronunciation in textbooks addressed to Spanish speakers. We had a similar study in Finland and in France and Poland, but nothing had been done in the case of Spain. Right, so this study, I thoroughly analyzed 30 EFL textbooks, so both the students' books and their corresponding workbooks. In this occasion, they were representative of the same levels, so again, secondary, university, and the language centers, but I decided to divide them only in 2 groups because the textbooks that were being used at university level and in the School of Languages were nearly identical. So we just distinguished secondary and then university and language centers. In order to choose the books, I got in contact with different EFL teachers. So in other words, these are books that are currently being used and we can consider them modern. And some of the aspects analyzed, we will see now in the results, whether pronunciation is present in the table of contents, how it is present in the different units, whether there are any revision activities for it, the inclusion of any tips or theoretical explanations, and so on and so forth. Right, so regarding the general and specific presence of pronunciation in the different units, I followed this scale that goes from a lot, in which I would consider that pronunciation is present a lot in a textbook in which it is present in more than 2 occasions in every single unit. For instance, to a certain extent, so in more of 2 occasions in half or more of the units, and finally never if it is never present. According to this scale, in the Group 1 students' book, so remember these are at secondary school level, pronunciation was present quite a lot. So between once and twice in every single unit. Whereas in the workbooks, it was, in most of them, it was never ever present. In the case of the university and language center textbooks, in the students' books sometimes, so between once and twice in half or more of the units, and a varied situation regarding the workbook. So in some of them it was present on some occasions following this scale, and in others quite a lot. In neither groups of textbooks was it present in the introductory or the starter units, and never in the revision unit. So this gives the impression that it is not necessary to revise what a student has learned in a particular unit regarding pronunciation. Also, you know that workbooks are normally to revise the contents of the main unit done in the student's book, and the fact that pronunciation is not present in the workbook, again, it just gives the impression that, no, you don't need to revise that. 1 or 2 activities is enough, and that's all right. And regarding the size, they are small sections in comparison to other language areas. So, for instance, with grammar, we have sometimes 2 or 3 pages of the whole unit, whereas in pronunciation it's just a table or maximum half a page of each unit. Regarding the sections, in group 1, pronunciation was basically present in isolated sections. So what I mean here is an isolated table that clearly said pronunciation and 2 or 3 activities. Whereas in the case of group 2, it was more integrated within grammar or writing or reading skills. In both groups, more importance was given to the suprasegmental issues than the segmental one. And here you have the numbers of the different sections found. So in the case of group 1 textbooks, more than 20 examples of word stress, and then sentence stress and intonation, 18, 14. In the case of the second group, is even higher. So word stress and sentence stress, 105 sections identified in these 30 textbooks, or 70 on intonation. Whereas with the sounds, you can see 3, 1, depending on the different sounds. Regarding the activities, so I conducted 2 types of counting systems. So first, what I wanted to do is, if in this table we have exercise 1 and exercise 2, I would count them as 2 different exercises. But once I started analyzing the different data, I saw that some of the activities implied doing more than one thing at the same time. So in the end, I opted for the counting system independent of the numbering system of the book. And here we have an example. So listen to the words in exercise 1 is the stress on the prefix or on the verb, listen again and repeat. So according to my analysis, this would be a listen and discriminate activity, but also a listen and repeat one. According to this second type of counting system, the total number of activities were 442 in group 1 textbooks and 1,578 in group 2. So a lot more in the university and the School of Languages textbooks than in the secondary school ones. In total, this came to 2,120 activities that I analyzed according to my typology. Regarding the types of activities, and here we go back to what the students and teachers mentioned of the repetitive format of the activities. So in group 1, I did identify 37 different types of pronunciation activities, but only 7 of them I can consider productive. And by productive, I consider those of which more than 25 examples were found. Here you have these 7, I don't know why this is not working. Well, you have the 7 types of activities, so listen and repeat, listen and discriminate, suprasegmental discriminations, or just simply listening. In the case of group 2, more positive situation, 51 types, but only 14 of them were productive. In neither groups, we found very few or even no examples of games, tongue twisters, songs, computer programs, anything of new technology to teach pronunciation. The predominance is clearly of perceptive skills, again. As we have listen and discriminate, segmental and suprasegmental discriminations, listen and check, and the few activities that are of production, I don't think they lack communicative function, because they are just listen and repeat. So it's not actually using these words in any context. It's just, okay, listen, computer, repeat, computer. No. By comparing both groups, 19% of the activities were of listen and repeat, 11 of listen and discriminate, again, 11% of reading aloud, and then some of discrimination. So all in all, this came to nearly 70% of the tasks followed this format, so clearly it's very, very, very repetitive. And finally, regarding tips or theoretical explanations, by this I mean in grammar, we are used to, at the end of the book or within the different units, the present simple is used for habits and routines, whereas the present continuous is used for actions that are taken, being carried out at the moment. Whereas in pronunciation, we very rarely have the schwa, you need to pronounce it like this, and all of the words that end in ER, OR are pronounced with schwa in British English. We have hardly anything of this. I only identified 44 examples in Group 1 textbooks, 165 in Group 2. Again, as I mentioned, there are very few in comparison to other language areas. And the same as with the different sections, they mainly explain suprasemental aspects, not the sounds. So sentence stress, intonation, or word stress. Right, so after all of these studies, I finally come back to my title and the second part, what research can tell us and how it can be applied to the real world. So what can all of this research that I conducted from my MA and my doctoral dissertation, what can it tell us about the teaching of pronunciation in this country? So first, that Spanish students of all ages continue to have problems with pronunciation, even those that have been studying English for over 15 years and that are going to become English teachers the following year. Broadly speaking, we do have the fact that advanced students have overcome problems with some sounds, but they still have problems with others. So we are getting there, but we need something more. Little attention is paid to speaking, and more particularly to pronunciation, in EFL classes and in the materials addressed to Spanish students of English. Pronunciation is regarded as important for both the students and the teachers, but in many respects they are unhappy with the scant importance that is given to it inside the classroom. So again, they mentioned that not enough time is devoted to it, that the textbooks only include a few activities that do not always help them improve, and a repetitive format. Broadly speaking, if I couldn't go into this for reasons of time, the students who are least happy are those studying at university level, so those who are going to become experts, they are the least happy with the role of pronunciation in their university degree. And the ones that were most happy were the language center students. So according to them, pronunciation is being taught better at the language centers than at university or at the secondary school level. Spanish EFL teachers apparently lack training in how to teach pronunciation. Group 2 textbooks are better, slightly better in the sense that pronunciation is present more frequently and in a more variety. There's a lot more variety of the type of tasks. Little emphasis is placed on production, both inside and outside of the classroom. EFL textbooks still resemble traditional types of activities. So if we go back to the grammar translation method or the audiolingual, we are still teaching students to listen and repeat, or listen and discriminate, instead of communicating in a normal way. And so despite all of these negative results, we do have to say that there are being improvements in the Spanish educational system. Okay, it's only fair to mention situations like the CLIL classes or immersion programs, the use of the ICTs, but there's still a long way to go, and all of this made me think that a remedial program is necessary. And so do I have time just to mention some? Okay. Right, so a remedial program, this was at the end of my PhD. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to put into practice any of these activities. I still haven't, but in the future it will be something that I would like to do and see whether they do help students improve. So I think they should be engaging and motivating types of activities instead of listen and repeat, by the use of songs, games, new technologies, because students are all day with their mobile phones, playing computer games or listening to music. 2 types of activities should be distinguished. Ones in which a certain aspect of pronunciation is taught in isolation. Okay, so today we need to stress schwa, so obviously an activity just on schwa. But most of the activities, from my point of view, should be ones in which pronunciation is integrated within other language areas. So we're doing a reading activity, and suddenly someone has a problem with this word, so the teacher tells them more, tells them more words with this sound and gets them to do a certain activity. And most importantly, emphasis not only on perception, but of course on production. How are students going to know how to pronounce if they don't pronounce? Right, so we have an extensive list of authentic materials that can be used to teach any aspect of pronunciation. So from new technologies to restaurant menus, medical patient information leaflets, role plays, games, songs, websites, role plays, sorry, I already said that, news reports, magazines, and the list goes on and on. I'm just going to give you some brief examples of those that are in bold type. So the songs, the games, the TV programs, and the radio channel. So games. I think some of the traditional board games, such as Cluedo or Trivial, we can adapt them to get our students to be practicing pronunciation, probably without them being aware of what they're doing. And now I have some examples. So first we have, well, this is not a board game, this is a game that I invented. So a definition example game. We have República Argentina and Montero Ríos are examples of. Okay, so these are two streets in Santiago de Compostela. So at the end, the student will have to say street. The second layer of the atmosphere is the stratosphere. And a place where you catch buses or trains is the station. So as you can see, here we are clearly practicing the initial S to avoid them inserting the epenthetic E vowel. So instead of saying a station, then they need to learn how to say station. And as I mentioned before, the traditional board games. In the case of Cluedo, have you all played Cluedo, or you're familiar? Okay, so we have the weapon cards, which are normally in the British version at least. They are the lead pipe, the candlestick, the rope, and so on and so forth. So we can change the names of these weapons to get students to always be pronouncing the same sound. And on this occasion, the O diphthong, which was one of the sounds that they committed more mistakes with in my MA dissertation. So the cards could be that the butler was hit on the head with a bowl, that tripped over a toy boat, was strangled with a coat, ate a poisonous roll, got tangled up in a rope, or slipped on a bar of soap. Okay, so they are every time it's their turn and they have to say how the butler was killed, they are pronouncing at least one word with the O diphthong. For Monopoly, instead of all the streets, the typical streets that we have in Monopoly, for each of the different card colors, each of them could be a certain sound. So for the inverted U sound, for the pink cards, for instance, we have Jug Street, Hug Street, and Mug Street. So every time they say, okay, I want to buy Jug Street, they are pronouncing the inverted U sound. For Trivial, each of the different colors could be a different question on a different aspect of pronunciation. So green for vowels, blue for a question on consonants, or orange for a question on varieties of English. Songs. Okay, I won't have time to show this technique, but if anyone is interested, please ask me after the talk. I found a technique by Mark Hancock, so he has a website that he shares with Annie MacDonald, and I think the website is macdonald.com or something like that. If you put Mark Hancock, I'm sure Hancock MacDonald, thank you. And one of the techniques that he suggests is the wrong lyrics technique in songs. So according to him, sometimes when we are listening to a song, it doesn't have to be a foreign language, even in our own language, sometimes we misinterpret the words of a song, whether the singer has an accent that we are not familiar with, or whether it's because of connected speech, and so on. So one of the examples he suggests is the song Yesterday by the Beatles, and according to him, this could become yes, today. according to the students' ears. And he's worked a lot with Spanish students, so it's a very useful technique. And here we have the original version, so yesterday all my troubles, blah, blah. And this could become, yes, today, old men's doubles, team so far away. Now it seems they're over here to say, oh, why believe in yesterday? Especially the last line there, why believe in, it just, you listen to it and it just seems the original version, but it's different words, it's totally different words. It's very interesting. And he has it with a couple of more songs as well. Right, so after this activity, we get students to try and explain why they misunderstood this word, whether it was because it was a homophone, because of connected speech, because of the accent of the singer, and blah, blah. More types of activities that can be done with songs. We could get students to find a song or a poem that contains certain sounds. Many examples of certain sounds. Think of songs that contain a particular word. And so I just went on YouTube and put the word strong, and at least 6 or 7 songs came up, either stronger, strong, strong enough, strong ones. To summarize what a song is about, or to give an oral presentation on their favorite song, band, or group. So the main idea is that to get them speaking as much as possible. Right, and just finally the 2 remaining activities. So one for radio programs and podcasts. This the main aim would be that students will create a radio program. So obviously this could be a long project for the whole term, and they should change their role throughout the program. And here we just have an example of a possible schedule that they could follow. So on the first day, they could just introduce themselves and say, okay, I'm Peter and I'm going to be the interviewer in this program and the contestant in this other. On day 2, their experiences about going abroad. Okay, obviously this can be real or invented experiences, as long as they're speaking, focusing on the understanding of vowels or the misunderstanding. This could change. On day 3, they upload podcasts on learning English vowels. Day 4, a live quiz. So we will have a presenter and then 3 or 4 contestants answering questions on English pronunciation. On day 5, podcasts on vowels in different varieties. You know that Scottish pronounces some vowels different than RP speakers. And finally, on the last day, they summarize everything that they have done and say goodbye to their audience. And each team would present their project at the end of the term in class. So again, always emphasizing the spoken component. And finally, regarding a similar activity, so instead of a radio program, a TV program. So in groups of 4 or 6 people, each of the groups could do a different type of program. So either a news broadcast, a quiz, a soap opera, a documentary, a scene from a real-life film. And at the end of the course, they would edit the videos, and among the whole class, we would come up with a new TV program, in which at 5 o'clock we have a quiz, and then at 10 o'clock we have a film. Right, and so these are the references of my talk. And finally, thank you very much for your attention.
These differences, when you mentioned about the happiest students and so on, and mentioning the education system as such, and comparing the students of Escuela Oficial de Idiomas and so on, don't you think it's because those students have a different aim, and in schools is not emphasized because they're not going to end up having an oral examination? I mean,
yeah, definitely that could play a role. But in the case of the university students that are going to become teachers of English, and they're the least happiest of all. So, but yeah, definitely the main aim. Yeah, so in the case of Bachillerato students, have they finally put the spoken exam? No, it's just the listening. No? Yeah, so.
I think teachers just need to concentrate on grammar, because there are a lot of students with very poor grammar skills and whatever, and otherwise they're not going to get the level they need to. And what about the standard? Because there's a lot to talk, which standard pronunciation to teach, and this about speaking like a native speaker. I mean, there are loads, especially with talking about the vowel sounds. So
yeah, well, definitely that's a really, really difficult question to answer. So you know that traditionally either the classroom, well, the teacher tries to follow the RP or the general American variety. I can't really say I'm totally against this, because we do have to follow one model or the other, because if not, this would be chaotic. But I do think that they can always introduce Irish listenings, or try and bring an Irish person to the classroom. Now there are many language assistants that come from different countries, and so the students are at least getting exposure to different, or put a video on where there are Irish or Scottish or New Zealand speakers. The variety I would prefer is RP, because it's my one, but of course I can't say that it's the best one, because it's not. And I'm always tend to get asked this question, and I always say that I can't expect my students to obtain a native-like level, because myself as a native speaker, but I've been in Spain since I was 9. Whenever I go back to my family in England, they say, yeah, your pronunciation is really good, but there's something Spanish in you. You don't sound completely English. And I'm nearly 100% sure that it's the intonation. So how am I going to get my students to sound English when myself as a native speaker don't sound English to English people? So it's a very tricky question. So yeah, obviously we have to follow one variety. Okay, we can't teach them 4 or 5 at the same time, but as much exposure to different varieties that they can have, the better.
They're going to find the transcription of the word. Yeah. So I believe in teaching them that pronunciation. Because if you go to Oxford, that's what you're going to find. But yes, exposure to all the different types of English that exist, because there are so many accents in England, and so it's very important. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah.
Thank
you. Thank you so much, Yolanda. I found it fascinating, I must say. I'd like to commend you on 2 pronunciation errors that my students make. You've mentioned signs, but my 2 favorite pronunciation errors are Bassi from bus, Bassi, instead of busy, Bassi. For them, they find it difficult because, okay, they say the same spelling. Why not? I still listen every year, Bassi. And the other one is the change from woman to women in plural. For them, it's extremely difficult to understand that the beginning of the word is written, is spelled in the same way, but never. So you know what I mean, right? So those are 2 of my favorite pronunciation errors. On the other hand, I teach university students, but they are not going to become teachers, English teachers, because I teach in another faculty, and I still have to teach English, right? English for specific purposes, but I have always had the problem of, like we all have we don't have enough time to concentrate on pronunciation and so on, as you said before. I don't use phonetics at all. My students are not going to become philologists, so what I do, I have developed a technique, sorry, I'm not ashamed of telling you, which consists of writing the words the way they would sound in Spanish. I think that would be in my case, it's working, so I think that would be a great step to work towards facilitating pronunciation. On the other hand, I think that, as you said, the new technologies are offering us a lot of help lately, and we are abandoning the pattern listen, repeat, because we have thanks God, we have a lot of help these days to be able to use all that. And finally, I have always been very interested in the brain. You know, the 90s has been the time of brain imaging. I have followed these trends. I have read as much as I could about it and its influence on learning languages. At the moment, there is a current led in Spain by Professor Francisco Mora Teruel, who's a neurologist, and there is a branch of neurology which is neurolinguistics. I have attended a conference recently. I went to see him, to listen to him, and he's a doctor, physiologist, and so on. I don't want to tell you how many titles and so on. I want, but for me, he's a complete authority on the brain worldwide. I asked him. Whereas we have brain imaging now to differentiate when a student is listening, when a student is writing, and we have the 4 skills, right? And he said to me that a student, something that I knew, but I'm going to tell you now the important part of what he told me. We know now that when a student speaks, a certain part of the brain is activated, right? When you read, another one is activated. But what is new, at least for me, is that when student is speaking, right? You cannot practice speaking unless you speak. That means a student cannot learn pronunciation from reading. I tell my students, you learn your book by heart and you won't learn English. You won't be able to say a word. And now, finally, eventually, science has proven that students need to speak all the time in order to call up synapses, which is the neuronal connection that leads to be able to bring the sound, considering it is the right sound, that's another matter, into what they want to say. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry for being so long.
Thank you for all of these. I also teach ESP students, so in tourism, so I don't teach the EFL anymore. And last week we had the first session, the first classes, and is this working? Yeah. So these are tourism students that obviously are going to go to work in a hotel or in a travel agency, and they tend to pronounce hotel as hotel, right? And trying to get them to do the hotel. And it surprised me because I know the English pronunciation is difficult, but this word, the stress is on the same syllable, both in English and in Spanish. So one word that they have easy, why do they change it and make it more difficult? So I was trying to explain this to them, and then we came to the conclusion that it's probably because of the h sound, that in Spanish we don't pronounce it, so that's probably, they think, why they stress it on hotel. So I'm trying to get them to know hotel. And thank you for mentioning the writing down how the word would sound in Spanish. When I did the interviews, some of the university students, when I asked them, so what do you do when you don't know how to pronounce a word, and the teacher says it in the class, and they do that all the time. Yes, and thank you for that experiment of Professor Mora, did you say? So thank you. Yeah, I will.
Other questions, comments? Yes, Nuria?
brief. You mentioned about the radio programs, and it caught my attention because this year in June we had a presentation of one of the trabajos fin de grado of one student here who had actually done a project in a school with the first years of secondary education of a radio program, and we could listen to bits and pieces, and it wasn't just focusing on pronunciation, but it caught my attention that it was connected, and that new researchers are also thinking of these things at that level.
Okay, yeah, that's what. So I think maybe you could give me the reference, and I will get in because that's really interesting. Yeah, anything that's new technologies or something different from the textbook, I'm interested in, whether for speaking, writing, or whatever.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
We should also try and modify public opinion. I still think that people don't believe that pronunciation is that difficult or that important, and we are often proud to mispronounce words. So welling, and we create words which don't exist in English, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I think we have to be a little bit more popularizing, in the sense that we have to go against myths in society and public opinion, and so be proud and try to accommodate your pronunciation to natives or pseudo-natives or whatever, because otherwise you won't be understood. And the problem is that in English they have these monosyllable words, whereas in Spanish, I mean, it doesn't matter how different you pronounce a word like teléfono. I mean, you could say teléfono, but you still understand it. But if you say mis, mas, mes, I mean, they're not going to understand you. So, I mean, we have to change all these patterns because languages are not the same, and perhaps, I mean, this is a problem of intelligibility and public opinion.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry I couldn't show you the actual videos of what we heard, but if anyone interested, but the one on the thinking, imagine if this was a real example. Okay, the thinking, and what are you thinking about? Okay. So yeah, it could cause serious...
this anecdote with sanatorio y tanatorium.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you go to the sanatorio or to the sanatorium.
Yes.
Any other comments? Yes.
I would like to mention something like a personal experience that I had when I was teaching secondary students in Andalusia. I had a lot of problems because they were laughing, basically, and I don't understand why. I want to ask you if you have any ideas or any thoughts. So with words like literature, sculpture, so I always try to make them pronounce them in the way they are, but it was no, I'm not going to say so. But why not? I don't know, they have like a resistance. And I think it's something that can be generalized in these countries. Like we have like, I don't know, like we feel embarrassed when we are talking. So how can you face these type of things in classes? Because for me it was impossible that any of my students at the end of the course did it the right way, even though I tried every day. Why? In other countries, I have been in other countries and it's not the same thing. Why in Spain these things still are happening? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I don't have a definite answer, but I think the primary school students, I don't think they have any problem speaking in English. So I think that the main goal is to get the primary school students to speak as much English as possible, and then when they grow older, obviously teenagers, depends on the mood they're in, but I'm sure, like my godson is 9 now, and whatever word you tell him in English, he will try and repeat it, or he will watch a video and he's not laughing at trying to say this word or the other. But also in my interviews, a university student mentioned this. And also she was a good student in university, and she said that in secondary classes, the teacher didn't really correct the mistakes, and so there was a student saying natur for nature. They were reading a text on the nature or something, and they were pronouncing natur, and she thought that it was nature, but it made her doubt because the the student said it about 10 times, and the teacher did not stop him or her at any instance. So she got home, and the first thing she did was to look for a dictionary and see if she was pronouncing it incorrectly or whether it was the other student. So it also, not correcting can create a lot of doubt for people that do know how to pronounce it in an intelligible way. But thank you. Yeah, in the interviews I got loads of experiences that they strike me a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think we should stop. Thank you, Yolanda, for your contribution.